I hope Sally's listening to this. Don't do that. Just open up and say, Lord, show me as we go through these things. So the scope of this study is to make a pertinent biblical study of Old and New Testament on ethnicity, racism, and discrimination and bigotry, the whole gamut of this. To find in the gospel God's solution for racist, discriminatory, bigoted attitudes and actions within the church, promoting ethnic harmony and biblical reconciliation. To evaluate, discuss, and promote actions we as CBC can take to eliminate bigotry, racism, and discrimination in our lives and in our church. Later on, when we get into more passages, we will spend I will stop the class about 15 minutes before the end and let you break into small groups where you are, just turn around and be together to discuss what we just discussed and to see how it applies and things like that, to have some time for discussion. That's not going to happen every class, but it will happen at different classes as it's appropriate based upon what we've been looking at. Okay? Now let me do this. So you flip your papers, please. Don't turn them over. Flip them upside. There you go, or you'll be upside down. Now, this is a list of the non-biblical, commonly used glossary of terms. Again, I'll let you look at these yourself and understand them yourself. Let's jump right into the study. I'm going to look and see if there's any magnifiers in my office. I forgot my glasses this morning, and I can read it, but it would be a little help to be a little bigger for me. Now, excuse me a second. If I make mistakes, you correct me.
You can assign a reader.
Why don't you readers?
That's all I'm looking for, just some readers.
I might have some like 1.75 in my car.
That would be good. Sure. And then Walter can keep his. Thanks, Walter.
Assign a reader.
Huh?
You could just tell.
No, I need to be able to explain it. And as I read the scriptures to explain it, I got to say it, so I'm sorry. I will, I was busy and I meant to get my glasses. Okay, so let's turn to Genesis 1, and I'll go over this first section together with you. Genesis 1, I'm going to read 26 through 20. Let us make mankind in our so that they may rule over the fish of the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. I don't know.
Where is the guy?
You can't see? Oh, wow, look at this. Okay, $16.50 an hour rental charge. The word mankind here is the word Adam. It's where Adam's name comes from, and it can mean man. It can mean both genders, man and woman, hence the idea of mankind. When you see the term mankind here in this section, it's the same word as the word for Adam's name or the word for man, Adam, in Hebrew. Let's look at this together in your notes. The Bible does not begin with a special race of people. When the first humans were created, they were simply called Adam, which means mankind, when referring to all of human beings, not just to the male, but to all, which it does at times. It can be used again for both. Adam and Eve are not Hebrews or Egyptians or Canaanites. They had no ethnicity. When they were created, they had no ethnicity. They're just created human beings. And this is the point. I'm going to jump on my pogo stick and I'm going to hit my head on the ceiling. I'm going to jump so high. There aren't different races in the world. There's one race. And if you start thinking that way, it's going to help you a great deal. There's one race. There's only one race. There has always been only one race. Are there different ethnicities? Yes. Are there different cultures? Yes. Are people different colors? Yes. Do they have different backgrounds? Yes. But they're not different races. We're later going to see that people that are racist are actually people that are against God because he made these people. And if you're angry about another human being, you're actually angry at God because God made that human being. And I want to get this understood, that what we're talking about here isn't something that exists outside of your head or who you are as a person. There's not this thing that exists nebulously about that you can grab onto and call it what you want to call it. It's racist or racism. No, 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 no. It's your anger. It's your hatred. That's what it is. And when you understand it's anger and hatred and dissatisfaction with others, now you have some biblical answers to deal with yourself. Because there's a lot said in the Bible about anger, hatred, and dissatisfaction and how you are to treat one another and other people. And when one another commands, it doesn't list it by ethnicity.
Amen.
It says love one another. It doesn't say love one another just like yourself, who are just like yourself. It says love as God loves you and as you love yourself, which means you think of yourself first all the time. So right from the onset of this class, I want to make it plain and clear and understandable that there's only one race. We all belong to it, regardless of the color of our skin or the culture we came from or what language we speak. There's just one race, and we're called mankind. Now that should help you. Should help you a lot. And to understand that this is what God expects of us. And this is how God made us. And if we're going to see later in Proverbs and Psalms, if you find fault with somebody, blaming God, who is their creator. Do you understand that concept? You're blaming God who created them. So be careful. All right, I don't mean to get mad, but it does bug me when people start dividing race into racist ideas, and then there's the white race and the black race and the brown race and so forth and so on, the Asian race. No, there's not different races. There's humankind, and we all belong to humankind. We all are one as those that were created. Well, how were we created? Let's look at what it says here. So Adam and Eve, on your notes there, Adam and Eve are not Hebrews or Egyptians or Canaanites. They didn't have any ethnicity. They didn't have any country they came from. They were created by God on the spot. It is incorrect for the white church to view them as white, or for black churches to view them as black, or for the Asian church to view them as Asians, etc., etc. Now, I have been to China, and I've been to parts of Africa and the Caribbean, as well as America, and it is true. When you're in these countries, and they usually draw pictures or something for their Sunday school class of Jesus, if you're in Africa, guess what color he is? He's black. If you're in China, guess what color he is? It looks just like a Chinese, an Asian. It depends upon. When you're in America, what color do they usually make him? And he's not white. He was Mediterranean in his appearance. But yet we pick things because we relate to God like ourselves. And so it's easier to relate to them that way. But you got to stop thinking in terms of racism and start thinking in terms of mankind, of all mankind. Now, their race is not identifiable. They are simply known as Adam. Because they became the mother and father of all peoples, the division of humankind into peoples and ethnic groups is not even mentioned until Genesis 10. That's how little of importance it has in the Bible until Genesis 10 for ethnic groups. Adam and Eve, as well as Noah, are non-ethnic and non-national. They are ethically generic, and as such, they represent all people, not just some people. All right? So now when we got to Genesis 1, 26 and 27, which we just read, this is the focus of the creation narrative. Now, there's some things that are different right away from what came before. God has just made all creation. He's made everything from light to water, to the stars, to the vegetation, every creature, and livestock, and everything. And now he gets to verse 26 and he says something completely different. What's the first different thing he says in verse 26 that's not like all the other passages where it says, and God made or he created? What's different? Well, yes, but that's not first. What comes first, it's different. It's tricky. I'm being tricky right now. Huh? Yes, here's a trickster, got me. When it says, let us make mankind in our image. Now, who is the us? Well, that's been debated for centuries, and no one really knows for sure. Now, you may have a position on it that you like, and you're welcome to do that. One of the suggestions is that it's a Trinitarian before the Trinity was known. In other words, it's the plurality of the Godhead.
In 1 John, doesn't it say in the beginning that Jesus was...
Yes, it does. That he was part of it. But it's part of the creation altogether, but it doesn't say in the creation account, us. Only when it comes to the mankind does it say us. That's a distinction. But yes, Jesus was the element of creation, the one who did the creating, the person of it. So it may be a allowing there to be the understanding of the Trinity in the Old Testament right away from the beginning. Although it doesn't say Trinity, doesn't mention three, it just says plurality. There was the thought of plurality of majesty, which in Hebrew is used to talk about a king, a majestic king, and it mentions him in the plural because of his power and the things he has and everything. That can't be true grammatically because it's not in the same order as it would be. I'm not going to get into all that with you, but so it's more than likely, though nothing is said, and I want you to understand that. When the Bible doesn't say specifically, don't pound your fist on specifics. It may mean this, it may not. This is how I understand it. That's fine. But if you say, this is how I understand it, and everybody must believe it the way I do because I'm right, you can't be specific when the Bible's not specific. So I had a professor in seminary, my theology professor, and every Monday we had a quiz. We had a quiz on the verses we had to memorize. We had 10 verses every week that were new, and you got tested on the previous 25 altogether. And if he would, say the text and you had to write the verse. If you guessed and you got it wrong, he took off double amount. He called it minus 20. 10 questions, instead of getting 10 off, you got 20 off because you guessed. What was he trying to teach us as potential pastors? What was he trying to teach us? Don't guess. Don't guess and don't say something that you're not sure of because God will not hold you unaccountable for that. And so we need to be certain. It says us, and that's new, and it's about man, and the reason he says us without defining who the us is exactly, though we have a good possibility, it says, let us make mankind. That's the word Adam, again, Adam. Let us make mankind in our, and the our is because he just said us, in our image, in our likeness. And that's what the idea is. It's being made in the likeness of God. It means, if you'll look at your notes, it at least means the mental and spiritual faculties that all people share with their Creator, our immortal soul, and our sharing the communicable attributes of God. They're the attributes that God holds perfectly, that he shares with us, that we hold, but though we don't have them perfectly, we hold them imperfectly, such as love. God is perfect love, but he's given us the ability to love, but our love is not perfect at all times, right? And then there's other attributes that we share like that. Well, this is one of the biggest distinctions between all the other things God created and mankind. You will never, I don't care how long you look and how far you go back and what fossils you can find, you will never find an animal making an altar to worship a god, ever. They have no concept of God or worshiping God because they don't have a soul. Animals don't have souls. They can't communicate. They weren't meant to communicate with God. You were given a soul that's going to last how long? Whether you're a Christian or not, how long is that soul going to last? It's going to last forever. And it's because you have this spiritual dimension in you, and you're created that way, that you were intended to know and love God now and forever. That was the purpose of it. Before Adam fell, he and Eve had that perfectly. When he fell, that's the thing that was marred immediately. He lost that communication with God. He was hiding from God, remember? Yeah. The Lord said to him, where are you? Right? When he answers God, he says, I hid from you because I was naked. His eyes were open to things, to thoughts and ideas and things that weren't open before. And God made a covering for him to cover his nakedness. We'll talk about nakedness a little bit later too here. So it's the capacity to relate to God spiritually and mentally. Let's look at one passage in the New Testament that's pretty cool here for this. Colossians chapter 3 and verse 10. I'll begin with verse 9 just to give it a context, but it's verse 10 where we see this side comment as a reference here. Do not lie to each other, since you've taken off your old self with its practices and have put on the new self. This new self is being renewed in knowledge in the what? Image of its creator. Our knowledge of the Creator and our knowledge of Him and understanding His Word and all, we lost it in the fall. The man without the Spirit of God cannot understand the things that come from the Spirit of God, because why? They are spiritually discerned. The verse says they are spiritually discerned. Yes, Pam, they are dead, but that's not what that verse says there. They are because these things have to be spiritually discerned. And it's because they're spiritually dead that they can't discern them. They don't understand them. And when you come to know Jesus, it's amazing how smart you get. It's remarkable. In fact, you think you know it all and you're ready to tell everybody you know it all. You can get in trouble that way too. We had a man in our congregation who is a physicist. He has his doctorate from the University of Colorado in physics and astroengineering and things. And he was a die-in-the-wool evolutionist. He sat right behind where Jay and Carol are sitting every week. He sat right back there. He came to church with his wife who was a Christian. God saved him one Sunday. By the next Sunday, he was a creationist, no longer an evolutionist. He got that smart that fast. Well, what happened? Well, God renewed his mind and his heart and his eyes, and he saw things. He had been studying the stars and all this stuff, and he saw it completely different now. His eyes were open. He said to me, he was crying. He was so excited when he talked to me about this that I used to look at this and never saw it. Now I see everything completely different. That was Bill Wilbur, if you remember Bill Wilbur. You are renewed. God renews you. When you come to know him, he renews your mind so that you get to know God and understand God, your creator, and you were made in his image. You represent the image of God. I'll go back to Genesis 1 now again. You represent the image of God every time you pray. The very fact that you can commune with God is because you were made in his image. You are involved in the image of God every time you study the Bible and you read, every time you worship, every time you have a thought about God. That's correct because of being born again now. It's because you've been made in the image of God that you have these things. And you've been renewed now. That image of God in you has been renewed and you understand it rightly and better. So when you understand biblical truth, it ain't because you just got so smart. What is it? It's because God's Spirit is teaching you and opening your heart and your mind to these things and helping you understand these things. That's why you're different than everything else that God created. And guess which human beings were created like this? You get this wrong, I'm leaving. All mankind. So don't you go thinking you're someone special. You're special as mankind, but you're not special because you're better than the next guy. Because the next guy was made just like you. You want to complain about that person? Let me get out of your way. Because now you're coming under the judgment of God. Because you're blaming God. Because he made that person. Just like you. We are made in his image so that we can communicate with God and that we can live forever and know God now because of his spiritual quality and to know him forever. That image is marred in the fall. It's not taken away, but it's marred. And the part that's cut off is knowing God. That has to be renewed in regeneration, being born again. That's why people demonstrate that they're made in the image of God, because what mankind has a history of worshiping, whether it's many gods or whatever God. What ethnic group of people have done that? You get this one wrong, I'm leaving also. Every group of people, every civilization that's ever been found, even the most primitive civilizations that they have fossils from and records of, what have they always done? They've always worshipped. Whether it's a tree, an animal, or a bunch of things, they've always worshipped. They've always made idols. They've always made altars that they bow before a God with. And the reason they do that is they can't help themselves doing that because they are made in the image of God. They have this God relationship of a soul, and they want to know him, but because of sin, they cannot. They're kept from knowing him because of sin. Well, what has to change in order for them to know the true God? You got to have your sins forgiven and your life made new in Christ, renewed in God. And that's why when you talk to people, they got all kind of concepts about God. Well, of course they do, because they don't have a new heart. I've talked to people that tell me they're born again, and they got these screwy ideas about God and all kinds. I'm sitting there going, well, you may be born something, but you're not born again according to the Bible, because if you're born again to the Bible, you're going to be renewed in your mind, and you're going to understand the one true God. You're not going to have all these other things. Yes, Sandy.
So is it the fact that we have that desire to worship, that if people choose not to worship God, that they start getting obsessively involved in other things? You know, like you see.
When you choose not to worship God, you open yourself up for spiritual attack more.
And then, like I see, excessive enthusiasm for, artists, musicians, sports.
Yeah, they worship something. They'll worship something.
Running after something else.
Yes.
To fill that void.
That becomes their God. That replaces the idea of the deity. Or they run into evil. And evil is real, it's present, and they run into it, and they do it wholeheartedly. Yeah. Okay, so mankind wants to worship. All right. The capacity to relate to God spiritually, mentally, we just looked at. All people of all ethnicity are, and I'm going to use the term ethnicity, not race. Why? I just told it. There's only one race. There are many ethnicities, okay? I want to get us away from thinking racist, that somebody's a racist. And by that they mean their ethnicity is what's first and they don't like others. No, you're not a racist. You're an angry, mad, sinful human being who has no right to make those judgments about other people that are created just like you. And in doing so, we're going to see a little bit here, you're also condemning God for making them. You're complaining to God that he made them. You probably never thought of it that way, but you need to. Because when you see a handicapped person and you lose your patience with that person and you don't care and you take the handicapped spot and let them go further or something, and you have an attitude that, well, they get too many privileges already, they get the best spots to park. And you and I both know that many times when you got those little blue cards, there are people that are parking, putting that blue card up, and the handicapped person's not with them. They're just taking advantage of that, and you get upset with it. No, stop it. You can't complain about that person. God made that person. This is what the scriptures remind us of. We're going to get to it right away here. Now, racism, or the presupposition that one's own race or ethnicity is superior or better than another, is a denial that all people have been created in the image of God. If you're what the world calls a racist, you're denying that all people were made in the image of God. It's a spiritual problem. You're sinning against God, and that's what it is first and foremost, a sin. Do you understand that? But there is but one race, the human race, mankind. Now we'll get to this passage I've been referring to. Go to Proverbs 14. Proverbs 14:31. Whoever oppresses the poor shows contempt for their maker. When you do this, when you treat somebody, whether in this case the poor, when you treat them this way, you show contempt for God. Whenever you complain about another ethnicity or another group of people, you're complaining about their maker, because it's God that made them, made their skin that color, that put them in that country, that brought them up in that culture, that brought them up in that family or that environment or under that regime or whatever else it may be. And we're complaining about their maker ultimately. And then look at 17:5 in Proverbs. Whoever mocks the poor shows contempt for their maker. Whoever groans over disaster will not go unpunished. The handicap and the difficult of the different ethnic groups, when you show contempt for them, who are you actually showing contempt for? For God. So if you complain, don't tell me you've never done it. We're sinners. If you complain about another ethnic group because of who they are, you're showing contempt for God. Now, you might complain about what somebody does. They stole my car. But they didn't steal your car because they were a different ethnic group than you, and you can blame the ethnic group for stealing your car. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. And if somebody hurt you or treated you poorly, and they're members of a different ethnic group than you cannot and must not hold every other person of that group responsible and accountable, because if you do, you're blaming God for making them like that. You can't do that. And yet, how many times in Christian churches, by Christians, is that done? How many times? It's done all the time. And the Bible's going to speak to many things that we're going to get to look to. I'm going to review some of the things I taught back when I first presented this, but I'm going to give you some new stuff that are new passages that are going to deal with heart attitudes that we need to correct in order not to be people complaining about other ethnic groups. Because ultimately what it is it's anger. It's anger and it's hatred. It's a sense of you being superior to somebody else. Having a superior attitude, thinking you're it. Well, I got something to tell you. You ain't all that. You ain't it. Barbara?
But underneath that hatred and anger being pride.
Yeah. Well, I said, when you think more highly of yourself than you should, pride, arrogance, all those things. Yep. Thinking your ethnicity is the best. Thinking your way of living is the best. Because you have the most expensive things, you have the best. And everybody else is no good until they get to be like you. That's what clubs are all about. That's what, I might get in trouble. That's what country clubs are about. It's about keeping people out. It's not about getting people in. They don't advertise. It's by word of mouth when you play golf with a member. It's about keeping people out because we don't want you there because you're not what?
Like me.
You're not like me. How? Economically? Oh, come on, what are we studying? Ethnicity. Education. All these things. You're not like me. You don't belong with me. I want mine and everybody like mine, otherwise stay out. That's why people are kept out of neighborhoods. How come a house for sale is not for sale if you're of an ethnicity that they don't want in that neighborhood? Now it's not for sale. Oh, we got a buyer. 2 weeks later, you're still looking, they're still looking for a buyer. But they're not going to sell it to you. These things happen all the time. And the root of it is not discrimination. It's anger and hatred and pride. Let's call it what the Bible calls it, because we need to fix it. Does God have solutions for anger? Does he have solutions for hatred? Does he have things to do for pride? Yes. And the more you become like Jesus, the less you will be someone who hates other ethnicities, or what the world calls a racist. It's possible for any ethnicity to hate other people, right?
Because they're not like me.
Yeah. Because they're not like me or they've hurt me. But that hatred's not right. Thinking biblically boils down to thinking like, speaking like, and acting like who? Begins with a J-E-S-U-S. Like Jesus. That's what it comes down to. It's not a complex problem to solve, but it takes the Spirit of God to solve it. Because I, by myself, I'm not going to change myself. I'm not going to change my attitudes. I'm not going to deal with this. I'm going to be selfish, and I'm going to like those that are like me. And if you're not like me, I don't like you. That's sin. We're going to look at many texts later in the Bible about dealing with hatred and these kinds of things to see it. So these verses at the end of this section here, these verses point out that the superior attitude taken by one in a wealthy socio-economic setting toward another in a poor setting is an affront to the God who created them both. Now, did he say those that are black poor, brown poor, white poor, Asian poor? What did he just say? It just said poor. Because the discrimination is not just according to ethnicity, it's also according to economic and social situations. There's a lot of Christians that have a lot of hatred in their heart for people who show up at our borders simply because they're there and we don't want you in. Why don't I want you in? Let's be honest, why don't we want them in? They cost us money, maybe. Why else? Don't look like me. They don't talk like me. Here's a big one. This is part of Christian nationalism. They weren't born here. Unless you were born here, this is not your country. Well, you better tell your great-granddaddy that, because he wasn't born here either. There's a lot of reasons that, it's like once you get to be in the in-group, you join the in-group in discriminating against those that are on the outside. Doesn't that happen in school? Yeah. The school I went to, it happened. There was the in-group, there was the group of the jocks, and there was the group of the hippies, there was the group of the beatniks. I'm old enough to know beatniks. There were different groups that were there that you joined and you hated everybody else. There were fights. Where does the fighting come from? Anger and hatred inside of you, because, and here's the biggest thing you're going to have to fight yourself, every one of us. You're not like me. You don't think like me. You don't live like me. You don't like the things I like. you don't do the things that I do, you're not like me. If you have that attitude, you will never minister to a hurting person. We're eventually going to look at the parable of the Good Samaritan, which teaches us a lot about ethnicity and hatred and what God's solution is. Let me get to the conclusion here. So it says, the same applies to race and racial attitudes and the mocking of that race. To tell racial jokes is to ridicule and mock God, who is their creator. Do you understand that? If you tell racial jokes, you are ridiculing and mocking God, who is their creator. Or ethnic jokes, or any kind of jokes about somebody other than yourself. Conclusion. All people of all races are created in God's image and therefore deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. That's the goal to get to, right there. This also applies to all genders, ages, and mental and physical developments of all humans. It even applies to the LGBTQ community. Do they need to know the Lord? Yes. Are they to be treated as human beings? Yes. They're not a separate class that were created that you can hate and abhor and make fun of and jokes about. There are people that need Jesus just like everybody else. How long has homosexuality and the perversions that follow it been around? Since the beginning. Since the beginning. And how long will they be around? A long, long time. And our hope is that people with the Lord will change. Our understanding is that people without the Lord, what's going to happen? Have I made you that afraid to answer? What's going to happen? They're not going to want to change. They're going to think that they're right. And it takes the Lord to change it. Okay. Let's close in prayer. Lord, thank you for the beginning of this class, and help us to understand as we look further into ethnicity and discrimination and these other things. May we most of all see you and what you require of us, and not argue these points the way the world does, for they don't have the truth to stand on, but we do. And give us victory through Jesus our Savior. Amen.